All right, so you're lacing up those running shoes, maybe thinking about grabbing a cup of coffee before you head out the door.
Makes sense. A
Yeah.
lot of runners swear by it, right?
Yeah, but is it actually a good idea? That's what we're going to dig into today.
Yeah, that's the question, isn't it? And it's interesting, even just looking at this one article here from Coffee at Corner, it's called, Is It Okay to Have Coffee Before Running? Even just this one article lays out some pretty conflicting information.
Right. Like on one hand, it seems like coffee could be great for a runner. I mean, hello, energy boost. But then there's that whole dehydration thing.
Exactly. And that's just scratching the surface. So to really get to the bottom of this, we need to kind of go back to basics.
Okay, so back to basics. What exactly is caffeine and what does it do to our bodies?
Well, caffeine is a natural stimulant, and it's found in a bunch of stuff. Coffee, obviously, tea, chocolate, even some energy drinks. And basically, it acts like a little wake-up call for your brain and your body.
So it's that jolt that makes you feel more alert. Like, okay, I'm ready to go.
Exactly. It speeds up your heart rate, gives you a boost of energy. And that's why that 85 milligrams of caffeine in your average 8-ounce cup of coffee can feel so powerful, especially before a run.
Oh, yeah, especially when it's early in the morning. But like we said, the article mentions some pretty conflicting info about how coffee actually affects runners.
Right. On one hand, it can boost your energy, potentially improve blood flow, which both sound pretty beneficial for a runner. But then on the other hand, it can also lead to dehydration and even muscle cramps, which are definitely not ideal.
Okay, so that's where the confusion comes in, right? So which is it? Is coffee a friend or foe to runners?
Well, to really understand that, we need to dig a little deeper into how caffeine actually affects our bodies during a run. So caffeine, it triggers the release of adrenaline.
Adrenaline. Okay, so that's the fight or flight hormone, right?
Exactly. And in this case, it's more like the fight part. It prepares your body for exertion, makes your heart pump faster, delivers more oxygen to your muscles, and that can lead to a temporary increase in performance.
So more oxygen, more energy for those miles. Sounds like a good thing.
It can be, but there's a catch. While caffeine can make your body feel like it's using oxygen more efficiently, some research suggests that it might not actually change how much oxygen your muscles are using overall.
Interesting. So like a mental boost, but not necessarily a physical one?
Potentially. And that's where those mouse studies we mentioned come in.
Ah, yes, the mouse studies. Always so interesting, but I'm always left wondering, does this actually apply to humans?
Exactly. It's important to remember that mouse studies, while intriguing, don't always translate directly to human physiology, but they can give us clues about potential mechanisms. So in these studies, caffeine seemed to decrease oxygen consumption and increase lung efficiency in mice while running.
So basically, it made them more efficient runners.
It seemed that way, but again, it's early research, and we can't draw definitive conclusions about humans just yet.
Okay, so caffeine might give us a temporary boost, but it might not actually make us more efficient runners in the long run. That's pretty fascinating.
It is, and it highlights the complexity of this whole topic. There are so many individual factors at play, like your hydration levels, your diet, and even your personal tolerance to caffeine.
So the Coffee at Corner article also mentions some of the downsides of coffee, like dehydration. How exactly does caffeine dehydrate us, and is it really something runners need to worry about?
Well, caffeine is a diuretic, which basically means it makes you pee more.
Okay, makes sense. So more trips to the bathroom.
Right. And that can lead to dehydration if you're not careful about replenishing fluids.
Uh,
And for runners, dehydration can be a real performance killer. It can lead to fatigue, muscle cramps, and even heat exhaustion in extreme cases.
So that's one strike against coffee for runners. The article also mentions some other not-so-fun side effects like jitters, nausea, and even sleepiness, which seems kind of counterintuitive.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And those side effects can vary widely from person to person. Some people are highly sensitive to caffeine. Even a small amount can trigger anxiety, insomnia, digestive issues, while others can tolerate much higher doses without any noticeable negative effects.
So how do we know where we fall on that spectrum? Is it just trial and error?
To some extent,
Yeah.
paying attention to your body's response to caffeine is key.
Hmm.
Do you feel energized and focused after a cup of coffee? Or do you get jittery and experience stomach discomfort, that sort of thing?
That's a great point. We often get so caught up in what we should be doing that we forget to listen to our own bodies. But let's get back to some of the potential benefits of coffee for runners. The Coffee at Corner article mentioned something about improved blood flow. How does that work, and is it a significant advantage?
So caffeine can temporarily widen your blood vessels, which can improve blood flow to your muscles. And this increased blood flow could theoretically help deliver more oxygen and nutrients to your working muscles, which might contribute to improved performance.
Okay, so that's another potential benefit for runners. But you use the word temporarily. Does that mean these positive effects wear off quickly?
Yes, the effects of caffeine are relatively short-lived. Typically, you'll feel the peak effects within 30 minutes to an hour after consumption, and they'll gradually wear off over the next few hours. This is why timing your coffee intake before a run is important.
So we've covered the basics of caffeine and its potential benefits and drawbacks for runners. But this Coffee at Corner article also mentions something about caffeine interfering with iron absorption. Can you explain what that means and why it's relevant for runners?
Absolutely. So iron is an essential mineral that plays a crucial role in transporting oxygen throughout the body. And caffeine can actually hinder the absorption of iron from plant-based foods, which is particularly important for runners, especially female runners who are already at a higher risk of iron deficiency.
That's a really important point. Iron deficiency can lead to fatigue and decreased performance, so runners need to be mindful of their iron intake. So, given all of this information, what's the verdict on coffee before a run?
Unfortunately, there's no simple answer. It really depends. But by understanding how caffeine works in your body, you can make a more informed decision. And that's what we'll delve into in the next part of this deep dive. We'll explore the individual factors that influence how coffee affects runners and offer some practical tips for optimizing your pre-run routine.
Okay, so we've established that coffee's effect on running is kind of a mixed bag, not a universal performance booster, but not necessarily a villain either.
Right. And that's why it's so important to really understand how your body reacts to caffeine. Are you someone who gets jittery and anxious after a cup of coffee? Or do you feel energized and focused?
Yeah, because if you're already sensitive to caffeine, having it before a run might not be the best idea.
Exactly. You could end up feeling even more jittery or anxious. Plus, you might experience an increased heart rate or even stomach upset, none of which are going to help your performance.
And on the flip side, if you handle caffeine well, a pre-run cup could actually give you that extra mental and physical boost you need to power through your workout.
Exactly. It all comes down to individual response. And another important factor to consider is your diet, especially when it comes to carbohydrates.
Oh, yeah. The Coffee at Corner article mentioned something about caffeine and carbs not being the best combo for runners.
Yeah, that's right. See, your body primarily uses two sources of fuel during exercise, carbohydrates and fat.
Okay.
When you have plenty of carbs available, your body prefers to use those for energy. But when carb stores are low, it starts burning more fat.
Makes sense. So, what does coffee have to do with all of this?
Well, caffeine can actually interfere with your body's ability to efficiently burn fat for fuel,
Hmm.
especially when you've consumed a lot of carbohydrates.
So, if I'm carb loading the night before a race and then chugging coffee right before I hit the pavement, I might actually be sabotaging myself.
It's definitely possible. The caffeine could be preventing your body from tapping into those fat reserves as effectively, Crow, which could lead to hitting that wall sooner than you'd like.
Wow, that's something I never would have thought of. So,
Oh,
timing and what you eat really matter.
absolutely. Yeah. And all of this ties into another crucial aspect of running hydration.
Right, because we've talked about caffeine being a diuretic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And for runners, staying properly hydrated is non-negotiable. Dehydration can lead to fatigue, muscle cramps, and a drop in performance overall.
So if I'm set on having my coffee before a run, what can I do to minimize those dehydrating effects?
Well, the Coffee at Corner article had some practical suggestions. One idea is to switch to iced coffee.
Interesting. Does iced coffee have less of a diuretic effect?
It tends to because it's less concentrated than hot coffee.
Okay, makes sense.
Another tip is to make sure you're well hydrated throughout the day, not just chugging water right before you run.
Don't rely on that one cup of coffee to do all the work.
Right. Aim for consistent water intake throughout the day, especially in the hours leading up to your run. And you might also consider electrolyte drinks.
The article mentioned those too. How do electrolytes fit into all of this?
So when we sweat, we lose water and electrolytes. Those are minerals like sodium, potassium, and magnesium that are essential for muscle function and hydration.
And if we're not replenishing those lost electrolytes, we could experience things like muscle cramps and fatigue.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which is why sports drinks or electrolyte tablets can be so helpful for runners.
Okay, so sports drinks good to have on hand. The article also suggested eating a banana before running. How does that help?
Bananas are packed with potassium, which is one of those key electrolytes we lose through sweat. Plus, they provide some easily digestible carbs for energy, which might help offset caffeine's potential interference with fat burning.
So a balanced pre-run routine could look like coffee for that mental boost, a banana for potassium and carbs, and of course, plenty of water to stay hydrated.
Exactly. It's all about finding what works best for you. If you're feeling good and energized, that's great. But if you're noticing any negative effects like jitters, stomach issues, or excessive thirst, you might need to tweak your routine.
Okay, so we've covered the physical effects of coffee on runners. But what about the mental side of things? Does the ritual of having that cup of coffee before a run actually play a role in performance?
That's a great question and one that's often overlooked. For a lot of runners, the pre-run coffee is more than just a caffeine hit. It's a ritual, a signal to their body and mind that it's time to get moving.
So, like a mental trigger that sets the stage for a great workout.
Exactly. And that psychological boost can be just as important as any physical effects from the caffeine.
Yeah, I can totally see that. For a lot of people, myself included, there's something about that pre-workout routine that gets you in the zone.
Absolutely. It's about setting the stage for a successful run, both physically and mentally. And, it doesn't even have to be coffee. For some people, it might be a specific playlist or a certain warm-up routine, whatever helps them feel ready to go.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like a mental cue that tells your body, okay, it's time to perform.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that mental boost can be just as powerful as any physical effects.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into coffee and running, what are some key takeaways for our listeners?
Well, first and foremost, remember, there's no simple answer to the question of whether or not you should have coffee before a run. It depends on so many individual factors.
Right. Like we talked about caffeine sensitivity, hydration levels, diet, even just your overall mental state.
Exactly. It's about finding what works best for you, experimenting and listening to your body.
And remember, even if you love coffee and handle caffeine well, it's important to be mindful of those potential downsides. Dehydration, jitters, the whole iron absorption thing.
Right. It's about weighing those potential benefits and risks and making an informed decision.
So the bottom line is, there's no magic formula. The best approach is to be aware of how coffee affects you personally. Pay attention to your body's cues and make adjustments as needed.
Absolutely. And don't forget the power of that pre-run ritual, whether it involves coffee or not. Finding something that helps you get in the right headspace can make a huge difference.
It's all about finding what works for you and helps you feel your best, both physically and mentally. So next time you're gearing up for a run, consider all these factors. Experiment, and most importantly, listen to your body. It's the best